think I'm live, and I'm not officially going to start talking until 6:32. But I want to welcome everybody here while I wait to officially go live. The chat is so much fun. It's just great to see all of you on the chat, the folks that are connecting and using the chat. Really, really fun. So we're just getting started, waiting for people to gather. We'll do that for another minute or two. It's so different being virtual. We're so lucky that we can connect this way now when we need to, but I do miss all of you and have so many great memories of last year's soiree. Welcome. This is just the welcoming time, and we're going to get started in 2 minutes. So have fun with the chat and uploading your photos. And it's just really, really wonderful that you're all here and joining us. I hope everybody's getting comfortable and is enjoying their sugar soiree baskets and wines, or if you chose to make a cocktail or a mocktail. I hope everyone's very comfortable and ready for a really fun, special evening. So. Hello, I am Julie Raskin, Executive Director of CHI. Thank you so much for joining us at the VIP reception of the Sugar Soiree, the sweetest event of the year. Before introducing you to our guest speaker and MC, I'd like to thank our very generous sponsors for making this evening possible. Our platinum sponsor, Zealand Pharma. Our gold sponsors, Crinetics Pharmaceuticals, Resolute, and the CHOP Department of Surgery. Our silver sponsors, Hanmi Pharmaceuticals, the CHOP HI Center, and Cook Children's Hospital. And our bronze sponsors, Xeris, Twist Bioscience, and Malibu Industries. And a very special thank you to our Sugar Soiree chairpersons, honorary chairpersons, Dr. Diva de Leon Crutchlow and Dr. Mike Crutchlow, and Ricky Thornton and Dr. Paul Thornton. We'll hear from Dr. de Leon Crutchlow and Dr. Thornton a little later in the evening. And now it is my distinct pleasure to present to you an exclusive interview with Dr. David Fajgenbaum, author of the best-selling book, Chasing My Cure. David is also a great friend to CHI, and he inspires our work every day. And for the second year in a row, Tony DeCopel, one of the leading television journalists in the country and co-host of CBS This Morning, is our host. He sat down with David earlier this week. Any second, you will see a white pop-up window that says, "Join next session or stay." We want you all to join, so click join. See you at the other end at the main event. Enjoy.
Dr. Fajgenbaum, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Tony, thanks so much for having me.
And I want to say congratulations on the book. It came out about a year ago, so I imagine it's going to paperback soon. Quite a relevant fact for any author. I'd also point out that medical school is difficult. Battling a rare disease is difficult. Completing an entire book and having it make sense and also be celebrated, also very difficult.
I agree with that. It was a lot of challenges along the way, but I would definitely say that that just where we are right now is like night and day from where we've been. And so some of these challenges pale in comparison to some even former challenges.
Yeah. So I wanted to pick up on something that you said in discussing your book, which is that you began to think of yourself as David in three parts, or really three versions of David. There was healthy David, sick David, and then the David who decided to fight back.
That's right.
And I think people tuning in tonight are going to be most interested in the David who decided to fight back. But to get them to that story, we've got to talk about the healthy and sick David. And I'll give people the quick version, which is you are a high school athlete and a terrific student in North Carolina. You're a football player. You end up at Georgetown University, where you are a quarterback. I've seen pictures. You looked quite brawny in addition to being brainy. You graduate, go to medical school. You are dominating things. People are calling you the beast. And then in that third year, you start getting a funny feeling. And you can pick the story up there.
Sure. So yeah, absolutely. Out of nowhere, I went from being this healthy third-year medical student where I was training to become an oncologist in memory of my mom, who had passed away just a few years before from cancer. And out of nowhere, I just started noticing fatigue and weight loss, abdominal pain. I noticed fluid accumulating around my ankles, and it just, something was off. And I wanted to keep working through my coursework, but eventually I went to the hospital and they ran testing and demonstrated that my liver, my kidneys, my bone marrow, my heart, and my lungs were all shutting down. And unfortunately, this was now the start of what would be an almost 6-month period of being hospitalized and even having my last rites read to me.
So when you say your last rites read to you, for Catholics, for non-Catholics, that means the expectation was you were not going to make it.
That's right. So 3 times in that 6-month period, my doctors told my family that David's not going to make it more than a day or two. You need to say your goodbyes, prepare for David to pass. And the first time that happened, my family reached out to a Catholic priest, and that priest came in and administered this sort of last rites, kind of preparing you for death. And of course, I was so sick at the time, I don't have too many memories of that experience, but I do remember being scared, and I do remember being sad that I wouldn't be able to make these memories that I dreamed of, having a family one day, having kids, taking on diseases, and I remember being devastated about it.
Now, you were a third-year medical student. In medical school, they teach you the greatest hits, right? Everything that is known and the best things that have been said about how to keep the human body healthy.
Yes.
But what you came down with wasn't one of the greatest hits. It was on the rare end of the spectrum. So tell me about the process of figuring out what exactly it was that was making you sick.
Yeah, like so many people watching today, the path to diagnosis is not easy. So for me, it took 11 weeks of being in the intensive care unit with multiple organ failure, literally just hanging on for dear life before the ultimate diagnosis or ultimate test was done, which was to cut out one of my lymph nodes and to look at it under the microscope. The doctors thought I may have lymphoma, which led them to do this biopsy. And the diagnosis came back as what's called idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease. And anytime the word idiopathic is in the name of your disease, that's not good, because that means that we don't know what causes it. But at the heart of it, it's the immune system attacking your vital organs.
So everybody with a rare disease, or I'll say virtually everybody, they immediately become a fighter. You mean to live, and you're going to take on this disease head on. In addition to that, though, you were also a student of the human body. And so you could attack it not only with the fortitude and the reserves necessary for a layperson, but with what you were learning, with your expertise. How did you go about doing that?
That's right. And even though I was a medical student, it still took me a long time before I was really able to shift from that second person, which was fighting for survival, to the third person, which is fighting back against this disease. And for me, it was that I just believed that some researcher somewhere must be working on my disease, and they're going to find a cure that's going to save my life and save all of our lives that had Castleman disease. And then actually, Tony, it was when I relapsed on the only drug in development for my disease, the only drug undergoing randomized controlled trials didn't work for me, that I realized that I couldn't just hope that some researcher somewhere, some foundation somewhere would figure out a solution for me. I needed to turn my hope into action, and turning hope into action is the subtitle of my book, because this was what just changed everything for me, is to go from being a very hopeful person where I hoped someone would do something to being someone who turns hope into action.
Yeah. This is part of the story that I think will be very familiar to members of Chi, which founded in the 1990s, one of the earliest rare disease organizations to use the internet to organize and to start pulling together these disparate strains of thought and research. Oh, there's a family over here with it, there's a family over here that's going through it, and putting it in a central location. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you had the experience with Castleman's disease of not having quite such a developed central location, a clearinghouse for research.
That's right. There were two organizations that existed at the time, and both organizations were really doing great work, but it was very much focused on connecting patients with doctors and very little on doing research. And I think all of us in the community just kind of assumed that there must be doctors out there and scientists working together and figuring things out. But as I shared, there was this moment for me as I sat in the hospital room getting chemotherapy infused into me, where my doctor explained to me that there were no more drugs in development. There were no more promising leads. There were no researchers doing work that were likely to result in promising leads. And I just felt completely alone. And I turned to my girlfriend and my dad and my sisters, and I said, I'm going to dedicate my life to trying to find answers. And I wasn't naive in thinking that it would be easy, but I knew that if I didn't try, that no one else was.
What a scary moment to find yourself at the outer edge of known science.
Absolutely. And I think that it was almost even, I don't know if it was harder or it was just different as a medical student, because in medical school, we take tests and we learn facts and we learn things that are known about diseases. But in medical school, you don't answer any questions about what's not known, right? You can't be taught what's not known. You're taught what is known. And so here I was, as you said, now a patient where I'm learning that I was at the outer edge. And in medical school, you're not taught about what's beyond the outer edge because you don't know what's out there. And so it was absolutely terrifying.
Something that I tell I mean, I'm not an old person quite yet, but what I say to younger people is that we have a feeling that the world is well mapped, well known, and that there are no more mysteries. But it's shocking how quickly you can come to that outer edge, to the kind of last marked path where the perimeter of science is, and you go into the wilderness.
That's right.
And for you going into that wilderness, and again, this comes back to, I think, what members of Chi and people tuning in right now want to know is, how did you insert yourself as a patient and a professional, fusing those two roles, those two parts of yourself to help further your own treatment?
Yeah, so I think that it's so important for this community and everyone watching to know that we as patients or loved ones of patients can play what I feel is one of the most important roles in all of research, and that is that of the quarterback. And it's the person who can help to connect the doctors, the researchers, connect with other patients. You need to have that. And I think that we assume that there must be that there. And that's what Chi does. Chi is the quarterback within the field, but each individual patient has an opportunity to be a quarterback for their care, or maybe it's a loved one of that patient, to be able to help to coordinate. And for me, it was kind of shocking to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this isn't already happening, or that there isn't already coordination. And in my book, I refer to what I call the Santa Claus theory of reality. And that's this idea that I had this theory, or I had this belief system, that for every problem, there must be a workshop of people working to solve that problem, finding the answers, and they're just going to deliver that solution to your door right when you need it. And I think Google kind of reinforces that, right? I mean, every question you can ever think of, you start typing it in Google and it answers the question for you. It finishes your thought. You're like, oh my gosh, someone else has thought of this. But to your point, there's so much in medicine, so much in science where we can't answer that question.
There are a couple lines from the book that I think are useful prompts that I'd love to just deliver back to you and have you jump from there. And one of them is, you can't see what you don't look for, and you don't know what you don't measure. What do you mean by that?
This is another major realization that came to me right in the middle of my first hospitalization. And that's that as a medical student, you get this sense that there are literally millions of tests that you can run on a patient, and that for every problem, there's a test, you can run it and you get an answer. But the reality is that when you run these tests, you're only asking a specific question. You're not saying what's wrong with this patient. You're saying, what's the insulin level in this patient? What is the cytokine level in this patient? And then you piece it all together into what you think the patient has. And so it's this idea that when you show up into the hospital, you can't just assume that like the test is going to get run that's going to solve your problem. There are many tests that need to be run, and they're not just going to happen automatically. And that is kind of a microcosm in my mind for just science and medicine in general, right? Is that like the right studies aren't necessarily just going to randomly happen. You can't just assume that the right projects are going to line up, and you really have to, in my opinion, be a part of what I consider aligning the stars. You can't wait for the stars to align. You need to align the stars.
I like the take control attitude, and also the metaphor of the quarterback. Quite convenient for the former quarterback yourself. Here's another prompt for you. Debate and discussion are key. Quote from your book. What do you mean by it?
Yeah, so I think that as patients, we oftentimes don't like to push back against our physicians, and physicians don't like it when
They don't like
our
it.
patients push back, right? It goes both ways. But I found that, and especially as I've become a scientist, how important debate and discussion is, and how the reality is that we should all be working towards this common truth of, what is the disease? What is the treatment? What can we do about that disease? And if we just have our own siloed perspectives, as a physician, I can say that we need the patient perspective. As a patient, I can say we need the physician perspective. And if we are all kind of working on our own, assuming that we have all the answers, whoever we are, then I think that that's the wrong approach. And that the only way you get to the right answer is, in my opinion, discussion, debate. And sometimes you got to, put on the boxing gloves and hash out, what really needs to be done.
Yeah. Cure is a big word and a hopeful word. Where are you with your health today and with your treatment?
So today marks a little bit over 6.5 years that I've been in remission. After my fourth relapse, which is when I decided to turn my hope into action, I actually went on to relapse again while on chemotherapy and nearly died for the fifth time before I performed a series of experiments that led to this drug that was developed 30 years ago for another condition and actually has been used previously in congenital hyperinsulinism. So this is a drug that has been used for a lot of different purposes, but from my research, I thought that it could potentially help me. And I started self-experimenting. I started taking this drug a little over 6.5 years ago. And I say a little over 6.5 years ago because I know that I can't round up to 7 years. I don't know if I'm going to make it 7 years on this drug. I don't know if I'm going to relapse tomorrow and be back in the ICU. But I do know that I don't round down. I don't say it's been just 6.5 years. It's been over 6.5 years because I'm so thankful for every moment of the remission for me and for all the other patients who are benefiting from this drug and others.
I like the term you use for it, kind of the overtime. You feel yourself, you're living in the overtime now, which I think is a concept helpful to people who are healthy and unwell at the same time. I'm curious, though, what's the lesson for other people, other families out there in your pursuit of an available existing treatment that had yet to be applied to your illness?
I think just think about it this way. For the first 3.5 years after my diagnosis, I walked past CVS's and Walgreens all the time. And in every one of those pharmacies was this drug that is now saving my life. And for 3.5 years, I was in and out of the ICU. I nearly died 5 times. And every time I was out, I walked past a pharmacy that had this drug in it, but no one had ever thought to try it. And so the concept, and this is what drives me all day, every day, the concept that there are drugs that are sitting in neighborhood pharmacies while there are patients who are in that neighborhood but don't know that there's a drug that could help them. And it's not that the patient doesn't know, it's that the world doesn't know, the medical community doesn't know. So what can we do to incentivize and to drive forward research to figure out which of these old drugs could be used in new ways? And despite the fact that COVID has been uniformly awful in every way, one silver lining that I really hope will emerge from this is that there has been so much of what's called drug repurposing, taking a drug for whatever may be and trying it for COVID, that I hope so badly that we as a medical community will do the same thing for so many conditions that need solutions.
It's a great point. And these collaborative networks are so important. And on the subject of that, actually, I'm curious, after you created a collaborative patient-focused network for Castleman's disease, you helped the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, a big nonprofit with Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla, They created a rare disease network, and she is part of that network. What's the backstory there? How did that come to be?
Yeah, so it's wonderful to see the growth. So Tanya Simoncelli took a position as the lead, as a leader within science policy at Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and she had always been very passionate about rare disease research and accelerating rare disease cures. And I got the chance to meet her a few years ago and to share the Castleman story, how we've gone about really going from no approved drugs, no diagnostic criteria, no disease codes. There's a lot of no's, right? We went from there to where we are today, where there's an FDA approved drug, there's 2 more in development, we've got criteria, we've got all the things that we needed to really drive forward the field. Now, it's not cured and we still have work to go, and that's what I do every day. But the reality is that the progress we've made in the last 8 years really emphasizes the importance of patient-driven research, patient-driven collaborative research, where we're all working together. So Tanya had seen our work, had learned from us, and her team spent a lot of time with our team learning what we're doing right and what we're not doing as well. And they launched what they call the RARES 1 initiative with the goal of driving forward patient-driven research, following this model that we've developed for Castleman disease. And it means so much to me to think about this helping other patients with other diseases all over the world. It means so much.
On that subject, if not for your illness, you would be in some other world, in some other field, working on other things. But your life has been pulled in this direction, and there's a blessing in that because you meet a lot of people you would not have otherwise. And I'm curious, who inspires you most in your world today?
So the person that inspires me the most right now is my 2-year-old daughter, Amelia. As I shared earlier, I grieved while I laid on my deathbed that I wouldn't be able to have a family. I wouldn't be able to get married to the girl that I was dating and to maybe even have kids one day. And I was so devastated about these memories I would never have. I've gone through a lot of ups and downs. I nearly died 4 more times after that first experience. But 2 years ago, my wife and I had a daughter, Amelia. And up until my daughter was born, it was, I'm fighting to live as long as I can. I'm chasing my cure to extend my life. At a certain point along the way, it became, I'm fighting to extend the lives of other patients by making more breakthroughs. And on the day that Amelia was born, I'm fighting to be able to spend more time with Amelia. And so I live in this world where I'm torn between spending the time I can with her right now, while I'm here, while I'm well, while she's just down the hall during these COVID days, but also fighting to drive forward the science so that I can be with her for a long time.
Yeah. Although I should have been a little more focused in my question, because identifying your daughter as the person who inspires you most is a bit of a dodge. I want the person in medicine or advocacy who inspires you most. Name names, doctor.
All right, let's see. The person in medicine and advocacy, I mean, the person from the beginning who's inspired me the most is Josh Summer. Josh is a rare cancer patient who, during college, he was diagnosed with chordoma. He dropped out of college. He began conducting chordoma research, and he created a foundation to take on chordoma just a few years before I became sick. And so, being able to turn to him, watch his progress, we share battle stories all the time. He inspires me so much.
All right. Well answered. I'll accept it. And it allows me to transition and point out that I think in the course of this, in the writing of the book, I see the cover of your shoulder, in getting out of that hospital bed, marrying your college sweetheart, having your daughter, Amelia. I think you've become an inspiration for others as well.
Thank you. Thank you. That really means so much.
So unless you have anything more to add, I think we can end it there. And I would remind people that 7 p.m. Sharp on the main stage is when the Sugar Soiree will begin. In the meantime, refill your drinks, 1, and 2, after you've refilled your drinks, mosey over to the digital auction table, make a bid. Dr. Feigenbaum, thank you very much.
I agree. Let's turn hope into action.